Hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's Living with Parkinson's Meetup. I'm Chris Kruger, Senior Content Manager with the Davis Phinney Foundation, and like the rest of the panelists, I live with Parkinson's. I was diagnosed in March of 2020. I'm really glad to be here today with the panelists for another session, and I'm especially excited because we're welcoming Karen Frank back to the panel and a special guest, Ben Stetcher, for today's panel too. And, I think this is the first time in a while we've had a guest join us. And I just really wanted to, mention that there's so many people doing interesting things in Parkinson's in this community. And, Ben happens to be one of them. So I thought we had a bunch of our regular panelists are sort of traveling around doing various things for the community today. So I thought we'd have an opportunity to welcome Ben and hear some of the things that have been going on from his perspective. And I think there are topics that are going to be interesting to the entire community. So I hope this is a useful conversation. So before we get going, I'll just ask the panelists to introduce themselves now one at a time. And when you do that, just give us a quick indication. What's the best thing that's happened for you lately? For me, I've recently started a program with a local PT group where we're playing walking soccer for people with Parkinson's. It's a small group right now, but it's been a lot of fun and it's really been going well. So I'm really excited about that. The local PT group has a number of programs that they do like that, rock climbing and pickleball. And so we played some soccer lately. That's been a lot of fun for me. So Doug, go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know something good that's happened for you lately.
Hi, everyone. Doug Reed, zooming in from Lafayette, Colorado. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2010 when I was 36, and I had DBS in 2019. So I've been living with Parkinson's for almost 15 years now. One of the best things that's happened to me recently, I've got kind of a wonky ankle, and it was hitting the crankshaft on my spin bike at the local YMCA where I do pedaling for Parkinson's. And we just got new spin bikes, and I don't have that problem as badly as I had it before. So I'm back to spinning 3 times a week and exercising every other day.
That's great. Yeah, I have such a hard time finding bikes, specifically spin bikes, that I feel comfortable on. So that's great. I'm glad to hear you found some progress there. Okay, Christy, what's going on?
Christy, I live in Troy, New York, and I've had symptoms of Parkinson's for a long time, since 2013. I think I just had DBS in May. Yeah, last May. So I'm still trying to figure out how to balance my meds and my DBS from that. Let me think about what has Alzheimer's. I guess I'm really excited for my PT appointment next week because I keep on falling. I'm having really bad balance issues. So I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, hopefully they can help you out. I find that PT has always been very helpful for me, especially with balance stuff when it's come up for me. They're great for me in that way. So I hope you have the same experience I do.
Me too.
Kat, what do you got? What's going on?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kat Hill. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2015 at the age of 48. Like many of you have had symptoms far longer than that. I think my update is totally non-Parkinson's related, and yet everything is Parkinson's related, right? But my husband and I and some friends bought some property in rural Washington, and we're cleaning up the property, and we just got new electric chainsaws because we don't want to cut during the band burn. And I got a couple of smaller ones that are more manageable for me, and I'm having so much fun cutting wood and stacking wood. And I love functional exercise. I'm going to exercise far more with a project, moving rocks, shoveling, cutting up things. So I'm getting good workouts and happy that it's productive. So that's my update.
Yeah, that's great, Kat. I share that experience a little bit. I was recently painted my house with my partner, and I had an appointment with my movement disorder specialist yesterday, and I said, my symptoms are way better on days that I do so much more. So when I noticed that when I was painting the house, I just had so much, my tremor was much less pronounced. And that was really interesting to me. I wasn't surprised necessarily, but didn't make me want to paint the house again, but it was a positive in some respects. Okay, so Karen, it's very good to see you again. Thanks for joining us and coming back into the mix. You remember this panel, I think, at the very beginning. Is that right? So we're very glad to have you back. And why don't you reintroduce yourself to the audience and just tell us a little bit where you're from, what your story is, and get us up to date on what's been going on.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be back and nice to see everybody and the audience here. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's when I was 47 in 2018. A long time ago in my other life pre-Parkinson's, used to be a nurse anesthetist, but I retired from that when I was diagnosed. And so much has happened since then. The thing I guess I am most excited about in my life is I really stepped out of my comfort zone this year. And about a year ago, I decided to host a fundraiser in my home community of St. Louis to support the Davis Phinney Foundation. And I had never done anything like that. So I gathered a committee of 11 people and I worked with my community for a year. And this event was very successful. Not that I didn't think it would be successful, but it was sort of surreal when it all came together. It was a stationary cycling event at a professional criterium bicycle race here in St. Louis, which is the final in a 10-city series called the American Criterium Cup, called the Gateway Cup. And we had hundreds of people on stationary bicycles watching the race and raising money for the foundation. And we raised $60,000, which was so exciting for me. Never done anything like this and realized that I'm pretty good at it. And it was fun to learn a new skill. And it was very social. I was feeling a little bit isolated with Parkinson's not working and sort of recreating a social environment for myself. And this was a great way to do it because I really spoke with my community a lot. And now, actually, I've been asked to speak at Washington University Movement Disorder Center here in St. Louis about the foundation and our resources. And it's just opened a whole new world for me. So to have new things that I'm excited about is great. And I look forward to more.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Thanks for your work on that, and also thanks for sharing the idea that you can do something new, and that can really help in a variety of ways with your own experience of living with Parkinson's. So, yeah, way to go. And I'm sure it wasn't easy, and I'm sure it was a little bit stressful. So I'm glad that you successfully came out on the other side, and you're feeling good about it. So that's great. So Ben, you're up, and why don't you give an introduction as to what your story is with Parkinson's and maybe something good that's happened lately. I think I might know what the thing is you're going to share, but maybe not. Let's see if you surprise me.
All right. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very honored to be here. I was diagnosed at 29 years old. That was almost 11 years ago now. I was living and working in China at the time. However, I soon realized that China is not a great place to live with, especially because I was so far away from home and from my family. So I decided to come back home at 32, and I devoted myself almost full time to advocacy. I traveled all around the world. I traveled to many different neurological centers and medical institutions, just trying to see what the latest and greatest was in this disease area. I found the whole here in Toronto with deep brain stimulation therapy, which I got 3.5 years ago now. I have the new adaptive kind from Medtronic. Happy to talk about that a little bit more later on if you guys want. And the one thing that's very exciting is that these days I'm feeling good enough that I was able to actually get back in just my local gym here. I've been training a lot lately. I've been training a lot stronger and just working on my functional strength. And I've been seeing the results, and it's been very rewarding just to see all those results pouring in so far.
And I just want to put out a formal invitation. If anybody wants to join the functional exercise program I have going here on the property, there's a lot of trees to cut down. If you want to come visit, friend, you're welcome.
I would love to come at some point.
All right.
Look, if there's a chainsaw party in just a couple hours from where I am here, Kat, I'll be there too.
Deal.
So, I think that's where we'll start today. In the early 2000s, when the Davis Phinney Foundation was very young, in the earliest days of the foundation, 20 years ago, the foundation spearheaded some exercise research, and that has really trickled into the general understanding of Parkinson's. I think, namely that exercise is important and it's helpful for people with Parkinson's. And so, given that, we've talked about it a couple times in these introductions. I think we'll start there, and maybe Ben, I'd like to start by asking you to just talk a little bit about how it's going with her. Like, why did you start this now? How did you decide to recommit to the exercises that you're doing? And what are you finding are the challenges, and what are you finding are the benefits?
All right. So I started because I just turned 40 years old, and I realized that the trajectory of my disease was not going as well as I thought it would be at this point. So that was one thing. So I was not properly optimized at the time as well, and that's something that is very common with people who get DBS. We go through these fluctuating phases where we feel great after our sessions, and then things slowly get worse and slowly get worse, and then you hit a plateau kind of, and you start to feel really crappy again until the next programming session. So I was hoping to find a way that I could mitigate that through exercise, and so far it's been very successful. I feel great these days. I mean, uh, I feel so good to the point where I'm not taking any more medication, which is great. But that's not something I would necessarily recommend to everybody, because there are other symptoms that then come along for a lot of individuals who cut out their medication entirely after getting DBS, that are often more of a challenge. But for me, I'm lucky enough that I don't experience those symptoms as intense as some other people do, like apathy and depression and other things of that nature. But I do feel it from time to time when I feel like I'm not properly programmed or I'm not properly optimizing my programming. Um, and so I hope that that was kind of a roundabout way of answering your question. I'm not exactly sure if it did entirely though.
Well, I just think, it's interesting to talk about the challenges we face with regard to exercise. And I think one of the things you're describing is that, there's an interplay between exercise and the way our treatments work for us. And, we always ask for people who are registered for the meetup to send us questions ahead of time if they have any. And, somebody asked, I'll read the question, and I think it relates to what you just said, Ben. So somebody wrote, during times of prolonged exercise, I find that my standard levodopa dose wears off. And how does one determine what additional medication is needed to exercise? And is it only trial and error, figure out what I should be doing? This person didn't want us to talk about a specific dosage, of course, but just what can we do to figure out and tune that response a little bit? Yeah, Doug, go ahead.
Before I had DBS, I was taking a lot of carbidopa, levodopa, and my movement disorder specialist gave me a green light to take an extra half tab before I was going skiing, for example. And it was more or less trial and error to find out when the optimal time was to take the extra half dose. If it was before I started skiing when my medication was on, or if it was halfway into the day of skiing and I was starting to feel tired. But ultimately, I found that the best time to take it was prior to starting the exercise. But again, it was trial and error.
So much of this is trial and error though, that we kind of figure it out on our own. Like for me, whenever I ate anything, like almost any food, I'd have to wait about 2 hours for the food to be digested, and then I could take my medication. Um, but it didn't matter what I ate. It didn't matter if it was protein or not protein. If I felt full, then I knew that my medication would not absorb. So being mindful of those things and being mindful of the fact that I mean, we are each our own universe, and we're each our own kind of constellation of symptoms, and and our diseases really differ so much from one to another that you have to become your own expert. You have to become your own guide, kind of in some sense, because no one can really figure this all out for you. It's too complicated. There's too many things for somebody else to pin on somebody else. You have to be able to do as good job as you can by yourself.
Honestly, that's what I do now. I don't eat during the day. I just graze on stuff because I can't have a full meal with my carbidopa levodopa. I'm also taking 10 100s instead of 25 100 because I get too dyskinetic with the too high one, with the normal
It's
one.
like
So
microdosing both food and carbohydrate. And it's interesting. I think that we all, for everything, always want a one size fits all answer, right?
Yeah.
And I think Parkinson's, a lot of us are understanding, is very complex. It's different for almost everybody. Therefore, it's difficult for providers to give a one size fits all answer. I could say the same about other disease states also. And this, our size of our bodies, our metabolic system, and I think in general medicine and treatments are moving toward personalized medicine. We've probably all heard that. And so, Ben, I'm super curious about, and I don't mean to jump ahead, Chris, you can tell me back off, Kat, but
I would never say that to you, Kat.
oh, you sweet man. You're too kind. But I'm really curious about the difference between an adaptive model versus a traditional model. And how do we find that, Ben? How does somebody in the chat mentioned you have to have a really good programmer. They have to know what they're doing. Very true. You need somebody who's going to help guide you through the navigation of this. And so I think we're getting there in medicine, and I'm hopeful. So Ben, in other words, we'd like all of the answers in the next 10 to 15 minutes if you're up for it, friend.
And can we move to Canada with you, Ben?
Yeah.
So thankfully, I think that there is some good advice that I can give, and that is, well, despite the fact that it is important that you become your own expert, it's also very important that you find a good team around you. Um, the team that I have around me, they've been vital to keeping me as healthy as I am today, and they've been really important in my own journey for many different stages along the way. But the
Mhm.
most important person has been Dr. Alfonso Vazano, who's my neurologist here in Toronto. He's also my DBS programmer. I reached out to him about 7 years ago, back when I knew a little bit about DBS. I didn't know that much about it back then. But my advice would be that as early as possible, I think all people with Parkinson's need to develop that kind of relationship with their kind of neurologist, with the person who's going to be their DBS programmer. I think in the long run, when you think about, we're all trying to live for as long as possible, I feel like, some degree anyway. But uh, I feel like in the long run, that relationship that you have with your programming neurologist, that's gonna be the most important relationship that you have in your life. Now, I wrote a book with mine. You don't have to write a book with yours. And also, I want to advise against doing something called doctor shopping as well. Like you shouldn't be going from one doctor to the next until you feel like this is the absolute perfect person in the whole world for you. But you should be trying to do what you can to cultivate a relationship with somebody who you trust, and somebody who trusts you as well. Trust has to be a two-way street between you and your doctor. They have to trust you that you're going to take care of yourself and do what's in your best interest, but you have to trust them as well that they know what's in your best interest. Having that relationship and cultivating it as early as possible on your journey, that'd be the number one piece of advice I'd give to most people with Parkinson's. Um, so yeah, that would be my.
I have a question for, because I have not had DBS yet. So Doug and Christy are your programmers also neurologists, or are they?
My
Physician
programmer is a movement specialist.
is a movement disorder specialist. That's who does your program.
He's my movement disorder specialist.
Okay.
And I
Yeah.
actually cried. I thought he was leaving the office, and I actually cried as much as I did as I was losing a family member. And and then I found out he wasn't actually leaving. He was still keeping his DBS patient. But I really cried. I honestly was really sad.
Yeah, because you have that relationship, right? And you trust
Right.
him and he trusts you. And yeah, Doug, how is yours also your doc?
Yeah, my programmer is also my movement disorder specialist, and I alternate between seeing him and his PA, who also does DBS programming.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. That's something that I didn't know. That's my own lack of knowledge. Thank you.
It's not like that everywhere, though.
Yeah, I do know people who have a movement disorder specialist and then a separate programmer who is also a movement disorder specialist, but specializes in programming.
In programming. Okay.
And as was mentioned, it doesn't have to be a doctor per se. I know somebody who has great outcomes with the nurse practitioner in New York City as well.
Right.
As long as they have somebody who you trust implicitly doing things in your best interest.
Okay.
I don't have DBS yet, but I'm fairly familiar with my home community and how it works after working with lots of people with Parkinson's. We have a big academic center and they sort of do things the way they do things. And I find there's an inconsistency there with who is going to be programming you each time. It just depends who's doing it when you show up for your appointment. And I hear a lot of discontent in my home community with that. We also have a private practice neurologist, not that many in my hometown, but I found personally, I haven't had DBS yet, but I tried both the university neurologist and the private practice neurologist. In private practice, he does his own programming. So you're programmed by the neurologist. And at the university, you're sort of moving through their system and the way they do it. And the doctor is not programming you. Not that a nurse practitioner, I am a nurse practitioner, can do a great job, or a PA, but I find that having a different person each time to be a barrier. I don't know if you guys have had that experience or any advice on that.
So Karen, that's partly why I was asking. In the Portland area, there's the big medical center, and then there are different centers that do it differently. And I'm trying to think about what might be helpful for our listeners, that we're hearing trust is a big issue. And Karen, I heard you say that inconsistency probably makes it hard to develop a relationship if you don't know who you're getting next time. So maybe for listeners, it might be smart to ask some of those questions as they're going through the DBS process. Ben, do you think that's the best plan? Like who's doing the surgery, but also who's going to be doing the programming?
Yeah, exactly. And usually those are two different people. The surgeon is very different from the person who's going to be your programmer. It might be a different person from the person who actually referred you to the clinic in the first place.
Uh,
Um, yeah, but I don't know, in my opinion, though, the relationship that you have with your programmer is kind of sacred in some ways. And I feel very badly for a lot of patients that I know who have gone from one to the next and who are constantly trying to find somebody who's better for them. I feel like those people tend to have not as good outcomes at the end of the day, and they tend to be the ones that have the most difficulty trying to manage their disease as well. Because I feel like having somebody who's stable, having somebody you know will be there, that's a very important part of this whole journey that you're going to take. Um,
mhm.
yeah, and each person needs somebody different as well. Like the person I have, he's great for me, but we have a very different relationship that I think he has with other patients, and that a lot of other patients might need of their doctor as well. So he might not be the best person for you, but he's the best person for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's an
and
interesting observation, Ben.
I would even recommend, this might sound a bit extreme, but I think it's that important that you might want to consider moving closer to where your programming neurologist might be at the end of the day. If you find somebody who you think is best for you, you might want to, if it's within your means, if it's possible, move a little bit closer to them so that you can see them. Because I need to see mine at the beginning of my programming. I need to see him every 2 weeks, really. So I need to be very close to him, not only like spiritually close to him, but physically like close in location as well. So making sure that because that's the only way that you'll know that you'll be treated as well as you possibly can be in the day. And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, your health is more important than I think almost any other factor in your life.
So
So
somebody actually just put
make
a
sure
note
you
in the
prioritize.
somebody just put a note in the chat. Sorry to interrupt you, Ben, but somebody put a note in the chat that asks, what was your decision-making process to choose which system to go with between Medtronic, Boston Scientific, or Abbott? Those are the three, at least the three that I'm aware of in the U.S. anyway. And I was just going to actually observe that if you are in a more remote location, that might be a factor in which system you might choose to use, because there are different programming capabilities in terms of how adept the programming can, or how fully function the programming can be remotely based on the type of system you use. So if you don't have the means, you might want to consider that when you're talking about this process with your care providers.
Precisely. And there's another factor that's complicating everything, and that is the fact that technology is advancing pretty rapidly. There's more than just three device manufacturers out there right now. There's a bunch of new ones that are coming online pretty soon. But having all those options is a great thing for some patients to have, but it might be a barrier for others. And there's also a fourth option as well, and that's waiting a little bit longer because there's all sorts of new reformulations of levodopa, carbidopa that are coming online pretty soon, like the subcutaneous pumps, some of the other new formulations that are being developed right now that might extend the time where like if I had access to the subcutaneous pump, for example, prior to getting my DVS, I might not have gotten it when I did. Um, but I can answer the other question about how did I choose which device manufacturer was best for me. Well, I had the opportunity to take part in a clinical trial called the ADAPT PD study. That study tested this new adaptive system. I was actually the second patient in the whole world to take part in this trial for this new adaptive system. It seems to be, and so far it's been beautiful for me. But like Chris just said, if I didn't live so close to my clinic, but I still wanted my doctor to be from this one clinic, then I might have taken the Abbott system. The Abbott system, that's the one that allows for more remote programming. Boston Scientific has another advantage. And that is that if you might not trust your surgeon as much, but you trust your doctor more, you might want to then you might actually want Boston Scientific. Because Boston Scientific, what they can do is it's called directional steering. They can steer the current around the electrode with a little more precision than they can with the other devices. So you don't actually need as good of a surgeon per se. If you might not trust your surgeon as well, then you might want to try that option. For me and for my bag of symptoms that I had, I thought that the adaptive system sounded like the most had the most benefit at the end of the day. So that's why I went with that system for me. Um, and I can talk about like what my specific symptoms were as well. That I thought would be best ameliorated by this specific type of DBS.
I think maybe if we can, somebody asked in the chat another question that I think we should cover first before we go into any particulars, because they asked specifically what is the difference between a conventional, I'll just say that way, a DBS system and an adaptive DBS system. I don't know that everybody necessarily is up on that.
So the difference is, the old kind, the CDBS per se, some people call it CDBS for conventional or continuous DBS, just means that it's always pulsating at the same rate at the same time throughout the entire day. Now you can manually change in your patient programmer. You can move it up. You move up the amplitude of the wave a little bit. If you have the conventional DBS, you can raise the stimulation a little bit there if you want. What the adaptive system does is it takes away that ability and it replaces it with this new adaptive system, so that instead of being able to like move the wave up and down a little bit just by pressing on the device, pressing on your patient programmer, it does it automatically by itself. It's reading something called the beta waves in your brain. Those beta waves tend to correlate with your symptom severity. And then, so if you have higher beta waves, you tend to need more stimulation. So then it automatically adjusts for you. However, it does it within the parameters that you set at each programming session, which is why those programming sessions become so, honestly, becomes a little more complicated, a little bit more important as well. But it's led to better outcomes for me, anyways. And that is that. So yeah, the adaptive system, it's something that I think it might sound a bit strange, it might sound a little sci-fi to some, but it's been much better for me. I hope that kind of explains it a little bit. I'm not sure how well I did though.
I think that was very helpful, Ben, because what you described that the system, tell me if I'm getting this right. The system can sense a certain category of brainwave, and then it can adjust how intense the electrical stimulation is, and maybe other parameters, not just the intensity, but it can adjust the way your stimulation is being delivered based on what's happening in your brain at a given moment.
Yes, precisely. However, it does it within parameters that you predefine as well. So that's an important part of it. And important to know also that those beta waves that are in your brain, they tend to correlate with your symptom severity. But that's only in some individuals as well. And that's the one thing that I need to emphasize as well, is that so there's something that you should ask your doctor before you actually get into DBS, and that's ask him, why do you think this will work for me? Why do you think that I might be a good candidate for this therapy? For me, it was because I have a very specific form of Parkinson's called nigrostriatal degeneration. That's the kind of Parkinson's that would best respond to this thing called DBS. I'll type it in the chat just so everybody can read out, so you don't have to. Here, nigrostriatal degeneration. You might want to ask your doctors if you have this or not, because it's a very specific form of Parkinson's but it's a form of Parkinson's that tends to respond best to DBS as well. Not everyone has that nigrostriatal degeneration in their brains. That's the kind that I had. So that's why that seems to be why no one knows exactly why, for one. That seems to be why DBS worked best for me, because I had that nigrostriatal degeneration. Sorry, Kat, go ahead.
Ben, I have a question about the different types of DBS. Is it true or not? And I'm truly asking the question. Do most MDSs and neurosurgeons have a preference of which system they use, or do many offer many systems? Because I could see that being a challenge. You may have a really great relationship with your MDS, but they only are familiar with one system. Is that a true or a false thing? I don't know.
That
My
is true.
my neurosurgeon gave me a choice of picking any system, but she recommended one.
Okay.
I think it's
Mine,
awesome.
mine all meet with together and they discuss your case beforehand and they actually figure out what's best for you. So mine thought the Medtronic is best for me.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember that just because at this time you choose an adaptive DBS system, you don't necessarily have access to that technology yet because it's not being used widely in the United States here. And the other thing is there's a learning curve for all medical practices. So the second it comes out doesn't mean that your movement disorder center is just going to adopt it instantly. They have to do training, they have to be advised on it. I know at some academic centers, it takes a longer for something to be approved. It has to go through a more stringent process and a number of layers. So making a decision about a device doesn't mean that instantly you're going to have access to that capacity and technology, nor will your doctor. I think a lot of the technology on these devices is beyond the scope and understanding of many people that are programming them. So that's important to consider.
Yes. Yeah, another important consideration, something that Christy pointed towards as well, and that is that so I just scheduled my third battery replacement as well. So it seems like the adaptive system, for me anyways, I can't say this broadly. We don't have the data, not all the data has been published yet, but it seems like adaptive does drain the battery a little bit faster as well.
That's good, Jim.
So that yeah, yeah.
It makes
However, I should
sense.
also point out that for me, battery replacement has not been as big of a deal as it has for other people. I know that some people suffer greatly as a result of battery replacements. For me, the battery replacement's been kind of simple and easy. But
That's
maybe that's because
good.
I have fat than other people do. I'm not exactly sure why, though.
I hypothesize that it's male versus female. Sorry, I
Yeah,
do
yeah.
because I feel like breast tissue where it goes, it's see, here's my scar. You can see. I think that it hurts more.
Yeah,
when you
I've,
have
I've
that
also
thing.
heard that in some people they actually place it under the rib cage, and then that would be much more painful if you actually want to
Oh,
get
I
it
see.
replaced. For me, it just sits like right below my skin. I can feel it every time I press my chest.
Me too.
Someone asked in the chat, which side is it on? My generator battery is on the right side. They kept the left clean because that's where a traditional pacemaker would go if I ever need that in the future.
Oh,
So to go back to something that Karen just said, I want to draw attention to, we had spoken, and I'm going to say that we've had this in a recording, and I don't remember what the recording is. So when we post a blog post about this, I'll make sure to include the recording where this part of a conversation is featured. But we did speak with an expert physician recently, and they were saying that just because you have the capability of having an adaptive DBS system does not mean that you, even if your providers are familiar with it, that you would access that feature of your system. And what the argument was that if your symptoms are well managed without that feature, they wouldn't necessarily recommend, or maybe it wouldn't even be something that would be worth considering for you at that time to access that feature. If your symptoms are already managed well without it. So, I think that this whole conversation really draws attention to the fact that you really do need to make sure that your care team is on board with your circumstances, that they understand what your situation is, and that they're paying attention to you. I've speaking of doctor shopping, I had seen a number of physicians early in my experience living with Parkinson's, in part because my first visit with a movement disorder specialist was at NIH for a genetic testing trial. They didn't treat me, but I got to see multiple movement disorder specialists. And so I got a good sense of what each one of those people had a different sort of manner with me, and they related to me in a different way. And some of them seemed like they were very formulaic and they had a way that they approached the conversation. And others of them were much more nimble in conversing with me. And for me, I would rather somebody that doesn't necessarily keep a solid sort of playbook. I'd rather somebody that's going to move with the sort of the Parkinson's punches. I don't know, maybe I'm going to get all weird with my analogies now, but different people have different preferences. And I think you want to make sure that you're dealing with a care provider that is aware of who you are as a human being. And that's the way you're going to get the best care, I think. So I think maybe we can shift gears for a moment and talk about another feature of this. There are programs that are specifically developed to help people with Parkinson's track their symptoms. Some of them involve technology like a smartwatch, and some of them don't. But we got a question from a viewer, an audience member who's planning to attend, when they were saying, how do I track my symptoms? And when they change, often within an hour. And I would ask another question about this subject, namely, should we all, maybe that's too big of a statement, but should someone track their symptoms? What would we gain or what would we lose from it? And I think it relates to the question of how do we get the best care? Because the more from my perspective, the more information I have, the more I can understand what's going on in my own life. But that may be distracting to some people, and they might find it very disruptive. So I certainly wouldn't recommend that everybody track using their smartwatch the way I do. But I don't know. What do you think? I saw that Kat and Karen sort of both nodded and seemed like they had something to say on this.
Go ahead, Karen. You're muted.
Karen.
The dogs are barking. I think that tracking every little detail for me has created anxiety and created obsessiveness about my life with Parkinson's. I need to separate myself a little bit from my life with Parkinson's because it can become all-encompassing to the point where it depresses me. And I think part of my success with dealing with Parkinson's, at least I've tried different things for myself over the years. I am the most happy when I am the least obsessed with my symptoms and obsessed with getting rid of my symptoms. I think that learning to live with my symptoms as they come and go has brought peace into my life in a way that sort of battling it constantly cannot. And there's this ever moving target where it just continues to go up and up and up. And some of that internal experience of just being okay with not always being okay has been more important to me than the tracking. Although I'm not that functionally disabled by certain symptoms. So it makes it easier to say that as things change, that might change for me.
I'm trying really hard to do the same, Karen. However, I also, with a, like, I don't like my watch being the boss of me. I found myself yelling at my watch a lot. You are not in charge of me. I'm not motivated by your thumbs up. I will exercise when I choose to. So I really resented that. And I'm like, okay, I can choose to take my watch off. And like you, I don't want my days on end to be focused around symptoms. However, I think when I am approaching a pivot time, a time where I am considering changing a medicine, or when I get to the point where I'm considering DBS, or I'm considering, so even like when I'm considering Botox, not in my face, even though I could use it, I know, but in my neck or in my arms, then I track it more. Then I pay more attention to, I need to tune into this so I feel like I'm really making a good choice for me. Are there other symptoms going on? Is there something else I can tweak? So I call that time like prepping for a tune-up. And then once I've decided on that pivotal thing, then I go back to, okay, now I'm not obsessing. I'm not going to track. I'm going to do the other thing. I'm going to live life to its fullest. And then if I get to that pivot point again, then I'll pivot. And I know for some people it's really empowering. Ben, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So first I need to just give a disclaimer so that I chair a patient advisory board for a company called Rune Labs. They developed something called Strive PD, which works with the Apple Health ecosystem to track two symptoms of Parkinson's. They have
Yeah.
They have FDA approval to track tremor and dyskinesia in people with Parkinson's. However, having said all of that, so tracking symptoms it doesn't have to be something that you actively do. It can be done passively as well. All you need to do is wear the watch, and then that's really the only thing that's needed. And the reason why it's so important, I think that more people actually try and track to some degree anyways, as much as you're comfortable with, is that when you're making these big decisions that Kat just alluded to, you really need a lot more information than so it's important that you have information, but it's important that you find also good ways to communicate that information to your team and to your doctors. And that's something that I think that's something that I've tried to do in my role as the chair of the patient advisory board at Rune Labs, is to make sure that we're finding new and better ways to communicate with doctors. So right now, what you can do is you can go into our app and you can press something called Generate a Report. If you click on the Insights tab, those reports can then be sent to your doctors, or you can take them into your next doctor's visit as well. Because what it is it's a lot of very detailed information about you. You don't need to see it. You don't need to you don't need to participate in it if you don't want to. But what it does give a lot of very useful information that doctors can then use to make better decisions for your health. So I feel like that's a factor that I feel like you might want to consider as well.
It's also a really, really great way for us to study what's happening in Parkinson's disease. So, yes, I think it can be really helpful for us personally. It can be helpful for our clinicians, but as a population, it also gives us the opportunity to know more about the disease process. So I'm not anti-device, but I love that Strive can collect data without necessarily having to self-manage that. And I've heard that. So thank you for that. And I do want to say a lot of people, I'm not a commercial, I'm not paid by Rune Laboratories to say this, but a lot of people have had a lot of success with it. And I know that I would be remiss without giving a shout out to Rochelle Flanagan's group who are studying and actively collecting data also. So I've been part of these trials and I have found though, like you, Karen, once the trial's gone, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to not do that for a little while. But we've got to do our parts without tipping over the edge and causing more anxiety.
I love data. I love the math. I love the data that comes with it. It's so awesome. It has helped me with my programming so much. I'm not optimized yet, but I can see the peaks on it for the month when it starts to come down and up. Then I know I need to up my programming.
Yeah, and I would say that it's been so helpful for me for getting myself properly optimized in my programming sessions. It took me a long time to find the right programming sessions for me. Once I was able to, that's when I was able to really like see the benefits that all that tracking really did for me. But I do want to emphasize something that Karen said, and that is that um, tracking should not become your whole life. You are not your disease. You shouldn't have to feel like everything about everything that you do has to be about related to Parkinson's. You are free to live your life and do you should be free to live your life and do the things that matter to you without having to always think about where you are in your disease state and always having to track so many different aspects of living something like this.
Ben, I have a question for you. You mentioned something about how the Strive PD has really helped you in your care and understanding PD. Would that be true for someone who is not as familiar with the device as you? Obviously, you're an expert at this. Do you think it's translatable to all of us who maybe don't know the degree of information that you do?
I would say that if you have a significant tremor and dyskinesia, yes, it's very helpful. Also, if you have if your gait is impaired in ways that really debilitate you. So basically, if gait or tremor or dyskinesia are your biggest complaints about having Parkinson's, then yes, you don't need to be an expert. You just need to wear the watch.
I just want to draw attention to the fact that you really need to, we can say the things that we have experience with, but it really comes down to your own personal preference and your own personal circumstance as far as whether something's going to benefit you at this level, right? Of a device.
I agree completely. For example, so I don't use this to track my sleep, even though I could, and I could probably like get better sleep as a result of if I tracked. I don't know if I could, but what I'm getting at is that sleep is not something I can't fall asleep if I'm wearing a watch, for example. So that's why I don't use sleep. I don't use it to help track my sleep, even though it can help track my sleep. It could help me maybe sleep better. I'm not using it for that purpose right now. So I completely emphasize what you're saying, Chris.
I want to go back to one thing to tie in two parts of this conversation, if I can, right, as we're approaching the end. And that's, the question about exercise and the effect of symptoms, the effect of exercise on symptoms and medication dosing. So, Ben, I'm wondering if and Christy, since you have experience with this too, is there a way in which I might be able to gain information about timing of my medication relative to exercise? Like, can I track symptoms against exercise using Strive PD?
You do down to time. So probably when you're exercising, you can probably figure that out by looking at the data.
Yes.
You have to be looking at the data.
Yeah. sorry, but also on the Apple Watch, if you start there's like 20 different exercises that are built into the Apple Watch that you just need to start doing them, and then it'll prompt you by saying, "Are you rowing right now? Are you running right now? Are you walking outdoors right now?" Then you just press the green button, and then you'll be able to track your exercise and see and correlate that with your symptom severity as well. So yes, is the simple.
Okay, so Strive P, the software will generate a chart or something that will show both of those things together.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So that could be really interesting for this person who was saying, how do I deal with this? The question we received where somebody asked, how do I keep track of the exercise relative to my dosage, and how do I adjust appropriately? Maybe something to consider as far as this utility of this system. Ben observed that there's a lot of things coming down the pike between levodopa formulations that are going to be changing and the adaptive DBS systems that are on the edge of maybe being the trials are nearing completion. So I think it's I'm not going to say something foolish like this is a great time to have Parkinson's, but the reality is that there's a lot of cool things happening, and that includes the work that the people on this call do. And I think I just want to draw attention to the fact that anybody that's watching this video or listening to this live recording can access things that they may not have thought they would do. Like Karen has said, she gained something by helping with this race, and it happened to be that the foundation benefited from that, but it doesn't have to benefit us. It can only be something that you do for yourself that you may not have thought you would do. So don't get trapped in thinking you only have one or two options. In terms of what you can do to make yourself have a better life with Parkinson's. There's so many things you can do, and I think that's an exciting part of what's happening right now. And yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, sorry, but I have one last thing that I want to plug as well. For anybody who might be more interested in finding cures for Parkinson's diseases, there's one program I would recommend that's called the CCBP study. I'll put that in the chat right now. So what the study does, it's a brainchild of a guy named Alberto Espe, who's a doctor over in Cincinnati. I worked with him to help develop this study and the protocol as well. So basically what this is it's the idea that we're each our own universe of constellations. We have our own symptoms, we have our own things that are important to us. What this does is it doesn't try to treat Parkinson's as if it's one label. It removes the label from your disease and tries to find what is specifically wrong with you. So from this program, that's how I got to know about this thing called nigrostriatal degeneration. That's how I knew what was more specifically wrong with me, and that's how I was able to better match existing therapies to my specific symptoms of this disease. So I would recommend anybody else who might be interested, if you can make the trip over to Cincinnati once a year, go ahead and do that. If not, then just go on the website and you'll find a lot of very valuable information that can help you, I think. So that's my last thing to plug.
Yeah, so we also recently had a conversation with Dr. Espe, and if you wanted to get a sense of what Dr. Espe's approach is like, you can watch that YouTube video on our YouTube page. I think there's a link to it in the chat already, and we'll certainly include it as a link in our blog post about this conversation. And I would note again that we're going to publish the recording of this conversation in the beginning of October. And our next meetup is the third Thursday of October, which I believe is the 17th. 17th of October. Am I right about that? Yes, October 17th is the third Thursday. And we'll look forward to seeing you again then. So thank you so much for joining us today to the members of the audience. And thank you, Ben, for joining us. And Karen, I'm so glad to have you back into the mix here. So thanks for being here with us. And I'll look forward to next month with all of you. And yeah, thanks for being here, everybody.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Davis Phinney Foundation. Thanks, friends.
Nice to meet you, Karen. Bye, everybody.
Bye.